Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to TPOG, the podcast of gaming presented by TBOG. I am very sorry it's taken so long to get to this point. I know we meant to have episode 2 out a very long time ago, and it was not meant to be this topic either, but I have been pretty useless getting things organised, and scheduling conflicts have come up, and, well, we never said it was going to be a weekly podcast. I did say that very specifically, but we are here now, and we are here about to do a very special episode of this podcast because in just 7 days' time, Qatar and Ecuador will be kicking off the first match of the 2022 FIFA World Cup, kicking off 4 weeks of football action, concluding in December. 32 of the best teams in the world, the 32 of the best international teams in the world, coming together to play for the ultimate glory in football. And I am joined here today by my good friends Nixon and Cora to discuss that upcoming tournament and see what we think is going to be the case going forward. I'm joined by my friends Nixon
Hello there.
and Cora.
Good evening.
So, before we get stuck into the prepared remarks that I know I've asked all of you to do ahead of time, I would like to just get stuck on one quick topic I wanted to get out of the way first. So, I'm sure both of you are very aware of the winner's curse in the World Cup. So, for some statistics for those of you at home who may not know what I'm talking about, with every edition of the World Cup, bar one, since 2002, the winners of the previous World Cup have had extremely poor performances at the following World Cup. So France won in 1998, went out of the group stages in 2002. Italy won in 2006, went out in the group stages of 2010. Same again with Germany 2014. And now we find ourselves with France 2018 winners coming into this World Cup. And if they do continue the legacy, well, it'll be a bit of a shock considering they've had a fairly good recent run of form. But my question to the two of you is, do you think we're going to see the winner's curse strike again and we'll see France bomb out early on in this tournament? Now, I will say now, they did not have a particularly good European Championship last year. They went last 16, went out to Switzerland in a penalty shootout, a very meek performance. But that being said, since then, they did win the UEFA Nations League, the most recent winners of that tournament, although they haven't qualified, to my knowledge, for the next edition of that tournament. So, let's start off with you, Cora. Do you think the winner's curse is going to strike France?
I don't think it's going to strike France in the way that it's traditionally. If you look at Group D, Australia, Denmark, and Tunisia, I think it would have to take a Herculean throw to not at least be second in that group. Do I think they'll repeat? Not necessarily. Maybe they're out in quarters, but I don't think they're going to have a group exit.
What do you reckon, Nixon? Do you concur?
I agree with Cora here. France has one of the easier groups in the group stage, and generally speaking, they do have one of the stronger national teams that you can build currently.
Yeah, I have to agree with the idea that they definitely have one of the weaker looking groups out there. Australia barely clawed their way into this World Cup through the playoffs against the United Arab Emirates. Denmark have had fairly decent run of form lately. Obviously, they made the semi-finals of the Euros. Tunisia, I couldn't really speak to, but bearing in mind some of other groups, I think this is going to take a monumentally bad effort on France's part to not make it out of the group stages. But I don't know, history has an odd way of repeating itself, I find. And France were the ones who kicked off the winner's curse back in 1998. So stranger things have happened, I think, in the World Cup. And I am more inclined to believe, you guys, that they will qualify for the knockout stages. I don't think they're going to make it to the semis. But I do think they'll at very least make it to the round of 16. But yeah, I think we're all kind of in agreement there. That's going to be the case. I guess we'll find out in 2 weeks whether we were right or not. Actually, sorry, 3 weeks. Whether we were right or not on that prediction. But I just wanted to get that out of the way early on. So, on to the prepared remarks. So, before all this started, I requested Cora and Nixon, and obviously myself, to prepare 4 different predictions ahead of time. So, these were who we think's going to win the World Cup, who we want to win the World Cup, a general hot take for something that might happen at the World Cup, whether that could be anything that's quite like an open category, and our prediction for the dark horse of the tournament. So the dark horse wouldn't necessarily be the team we think might win, but it's like a team we expect to do better than perhaps they are being expected to. So let's start off with the big one, the easy one. Who do we think's going to win? Nixon, lay it on the table. Who do you think's going to take home the World Cup this year?
I have to say that my personal idea of who might win might be Argentina. While that is hopeful thinking, they are in incredible form nationwide. If I recall, they had like a 32-game win streak going undefeated before the World Cup started. So they are going on very, very strong ground.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of hope around the South American nations, particularly Brazil and Argentina, who have both had very good runs of form lately. Obviously, Argentina are the current South America. I can't remember the name of the tournament in South America, but they're equivalent of the Euros. They were the most recent winner of that, and Brazil also won the Olympics. If that really means anything, probably doesn't mean too much, but they did. So there's a lot of hope going into South America, who have not had a very good time in the World Cup for a long time now. The last time a South American nation took it was 2002 Brazil. But Argentina, I think that's a fairly popular prediction there. Obviously, Lionel Messi's potentially last international tournament, probably likely to be his last international tournament, so that would be a hell of a farewell for him if he was able to pull it off. What about you, Cora? Do you concur, or did you have another team in mind for taking home the glory this time?
No, my pick is different. I'm going to go with a 2010 repeat, I believe, the Spanish. Yeah, they won it. Yeah, they were 2010, correct?
Yep.
I watched the last major tournament that I watched, forgive me, was the Euro in 2020, and I actually thought in the semifinal game against Italy they were the superior team. I think they looked more complete on almost all phases. Maybe their midfielders were a bit weaker than like Chiesa and some other of the Italians that were doing some really good fast breaks or counterattacks. But Italy's gone. So I think that with the scope of games that I've watched so far, I think the Spanish looked the best. I think that climate of where you play is going to make a factor because it's still going to be hot in Qatar regardless of the season. And so I'll give them a little bit of a Mediterranean edge there.
Actually, that is an interesting thing I saw recently. So apparently, every time the tournament's not held in Europe, the amount of European teams in the knockout stages drops exponentially. So I can't remember the exact stats, but I think I saw something like when Brazil hosted it last in 2014, they were the last non-European nation to host it. Only 8 European teams made it through to the last 16, whereas 4 years later in Russia, it was 12 or 13, I think. So there is definitely some merit to be had that perhaps there is like a climate thing involved. Obviously, Spain is in Europe, but significantly hotter nations, so I think there's definitely something to be said in regards to that.
I'll leave it to you for your pick now.
Yeah, so this is a bit of a tough one. I think there's several candidates who could take this. I don't think there's any like standout favourite right now. I've already kind of given my opinion on where I think France is going to end up, but for me, I think I'm going to have to concur with Nixon, and I think Argentina's going to take it. I think it's South America's year, but I don't think Brazil quite have the X factor sort of to get over the line. So I do think it's going to be Argentina, and I think we're going to have a very epic storyline with Messi winning the World Cup at his, I don't know, 4th or 5th time of asking. Well, not ending his career, but certainly getting the one trophy that's always eluded him. Is partially at least due to the climate thing, like you mentioned. Any nation sort of based in a very hot area and plays out of a hot area quite like as their standard is going to have an advantage here. The likes of, colder nations like the Denmark, Sweden, England, I think are going to struggle a little bit more due to that climate. I mean, we're talking really fucking hot in Qatar. That, like, I don't think it's ever been quite this hot in a tournament before. Don't quote me on that, but it might be. But it might well be. But I don't know. Something's just telling. I can't go off much more than gut feeling. I think the climate's definitely going to play a part. I think they've got a good lineup of players. I think there's a very big storyline to be had with Messi being at the helm. But for me, I just got the gut feeling that this is going to be their time. And I think South America is long overdue a win. And none of the current European nations, to me, stand out as being strong enough to be able to defeat them right now on the journey to winning. So, I don't know. Was there anything more you guys wanted to throw in on that one? Is there any other team you guys think might be a bit of a strong favourite going into this that we haven't? We've obviously only mentioned two nations between us, but any other picks you think might be good for the taking the trophy this time?
I think that while I agree that I don't think Brazil quite has it to win the final, with their form as well and the players that they have collected for this year's World Cup, they might actually have a chance to pull through if they make it through to a good placement after the group stage.
Yeah, I was just taking a quick look at Brazil's group. So they've got Serbia, Switzerland, and Cameroon. Now, on the surface of it, not the worst group in the world. Switzerland are always a bit of a dark horse, and Serbia, generally better team than most people give them credit for. So they might not quite sail through the group that easily. Don't know.
Although Brazil has the advantage of everyone knows the quote-unquote Brazilian flair, which throughout history has helped Brazil win multiple trophies, because there is not quite a country who plays football like Brazil usually does. They have the advantage that the other countries in Group G, Serbia, Switzerland, and Cameroon, might not know how to play against them because they play such a different pace of game.
Yeah, that is certainly very true.
I just wanted to finish off by saying I do not have a follow up pick without kind of spoiling some of my dark horses. So, I'm ready to move on to the next question.
All right, fair enough. Well, before we do, I just kind of want to go over some other nations that I think we are. I certainly have a look in, so I want to go over a couple. Let's go over France first of all. Current world champions, UEFA Nations League champions. They are a talented squad. There is absolutely no denying that. But being real about this, I think only once in the tournament's history, and bearing in mind the tournament is nearly 100 years old, has any nation ever won consecutive World Cups, and that was Brazil, I believe, in the early 60s. I don't see them winning, but if they do bring their A game, certainly qualified candidates, I would say.
I do want to add that there also was, during the very, very start of the World Cup, during the 30s, Italy won it twice in a row. But that was when the World Cup matches were way, way lower, like down to below 20 per tournament.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that. I knew Uruguay won it like the first and the third ones, but I didn't know there was like two in a row for Italy. But I guess that makes sense actually that you mention it.
After that, it was Uruguay, Italy twice, Uruguay, Germany, and then Brazil twice. But a lot of people consider Brazil's double victory in a row to be the most, how could I say, official, because it's when the actual concept of the World Cup got standardized more into how it is, or closer to how it is today. It was way more loose back when Italy won it twice.
Yeah, I mean, either way, regardless, it's certainly a incredibly impressive feat that we have not seen for half a century. So, yeah.
My thoughts on France is that it would have to take I think a bad round of 16 draw for them to go out before quarters. I think that they win this group. Denmark would have been kind of my dark horse pick in the group, but I do actually think that I'm going to give quite a lot of weight to Heat. And I think that they'll still be good enough for second, but I don't think they're going to be good enough to dethrone France in the group. So I think that France is going to get a fairly generous round of 16 draw.
I do have to agree that out of Group D, France is very clearly the top pick. And if for somehow they don't make it out as the top of Group D, I think their hope of winning the World Cup is completely gone. But with their current standings, I do believe France might be the closest that we have had to have a double win in a row since Brazil did it. I don't think any other team has had quite the run with the last World Cup and the team that they have built currently than France has currently right now.
Yeah, I think you might be right on that actually. Yeah, it's obviously like half a century, but they are still a good team on their day. I think maybe in the Euros, couple penalty kicks away from making the quarterfinals. Who knows how much further they would have gone if that had happened. But yeah, I think we'll be keeping a keen eye on them because they definitely are, regardless of anything else, still going to go in as strong contenders, if not favourites. So next team I want to go over. We've gone over, obviously, what a legendary story it would be for Lionel Messi to take home this World Cup. But on the flip side of the coin, his supposed rival and the person who's been compared to every single day for the past 12 or 14 years, however long it's been, Cristiano Ronaldo and Portugal. They're in Group H with Ghana, Uruguay, and South Korea. So how are we feeling about Portugal's chances at this World Cup? Why don't we start with you, Nixon?
I do think they have quite a good chance because once I looked through the team sheet, they do have some quite strong players there. And while I think Uruguay and Korea Republic or South Korea might be somewhat problematic because both of them have very, very strong players, I think Portugal might have a good chance to make it at least high up on the uh, after the group stage, and might actually have a chance to at least go into the semis, if not the final.
This is anecdotal, but it always feels like Portugal in international competitions are a coin flip. You had the, I believe, 2016 Euro where they beat France with a very young team. And then you have other tournaments where they were kind of invisible or not playing up to kind of expectation. Like if it's all together on paper, they can make it very far, but also feels like they're just as likely to kind of collapse.
Yeah, Portugal always strikes me as one of those teams that always goes in with an amazing attack, but their defense is never usually that much to write home about. Like, I'm not saying they're bad, but it usually ends up being the defense that kind of holds them back a little bit. Obviously, as Cora said, as recently as 6 years ago, they did win a major international tournament, but World Cup performances have left a bit something to be desired, especially the last couple. So, yeah, I think it really depends on how much their attacking team can really show up at this World Cup and if they can turn on the style. But personally, I have to say I don't expect them to get to the Final Four. Quarterfinals, I think, best for them. But yeah, I think they just don't quite have what's required to be able to break down some of the bigger teams, personally. All right, last team I want to go over before we move on to the next segment. And I feel like I'm going to get my heart broken a few times here, but I would like to discuss England before we do. So we would never normally, if we'd recorded this podcast a few years ago, England would not even be ever been on the radar. But fourth place at the 2018 World Cup, second place at the 2020 Euros. Extremely poor run of form in the recent Nations League. They haven't won a match in 6 now, having lost to Hungary twice, Germany once, and then 2 draws with Italy and another draw with Germany. But it can't be denied that over the last few years, admittedly with some favourable draws, England has had more success than they have had in, well, decades, quite frankly. So, given everything that's been going on with them, Cora, how do you see England faring in this tournament?
I think that this England team is probably a bit more tenacious mentally than some of the previous international teams. They have had, the share of, I wouldn't call it disappointment, definitely heartbreak, because they have put up good showings in the tournaments that matter. But if we're going to cycle back into temperature playing a factor, I think that, and then also recent performances, I think they might play down to their opponents a bit. I think it just depends on if those younger players from last year have kind of leveled up a bit. Saka and that young core, they can probably do quite well. Group B is also a very interesting group because um, I do not know relatively how strong USA and Wales are at this moment because the United States has put up a very strong, for their standards, showing the past 2 years, and Wales had a fairly strong qualification into the World Cup when it came down to it.
What about you, Nixon?
I do think that this year's World Cup for England might be the best chance they've had for a long time, since they do have some of the best players they've had for a World Cup that are in good form and have proven to be very, very good in very, very recent years or even in this season. And there are a lot of new faces which will most likely have a big effect on how the games go for either for England or against Finland. England, not Finland.
I was going to say Finland. When did they qualify? Yeah, so from my perspective, obviously I'm a little bit biased, but I think we go in with a bit of an outside chance. But I can't escape the feeling that our best opportunities are behind us now. I feel like if we were going to win a tournament, it should have happened in the last couple. And there are a lot of top international teams for me that have been underperforming in recent years. Until recently, Brazil and Argentina were among them. Certainly, Germany has been fairly poor for a long time now. Netherlands, Belgium, a lot of teams underperforming. But England had the opportunity there to take it. But I feel like a lot of these nations are starting to creep back in power again. And England's squad does have undeniable depth and strength. But they just never quite seem to have that extra edge to be able to take them all the way. I would love to be wrong, but I don't see them making... maybe the semi-finals, I don't see them making it any further than that myself. But I would also like to say, sort of piggybacking on Cora's comment, that group, Iran, USA, Wales, I think low-key might be one of the tougher groups in the entire tournament. They are proper scrappy teams. Like Wales are one of those teams that I think gets underestimated a lot, but they are not that bad. And Iran, they're just one of those teams that just drains opponents. And I just have this feeling. I just have this feeling with this group that it's not going to be as straightforward as people think. But yeah, I guess all we can do is wait and see.
I do agree that while they don't have like a secondary like superpower of a team, like say with Group E they have Germany and Spain, but they have one of the most consistent groups where every team is like relatively on the same level, other than the one quote unquote superpower of the group.
Actually, you're saying that reminds me. I read an article a few days back that said Group B is the only group in the tournament where every single one of those teams is in the top 20 of the FIFA rankings. So I believe Iran was lowest at 20, and then USA and Wales are somewhere in like the 15, 16, 17 region, I believe. England's at 8th right now, or 6th. But yeah, definitely in terms of FIFA rankings, the most competitive group there is.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a dogfight. I wouldn't be surprised to see a significant amount of ties in that group. I don't know how they're going to deal with breakers, but I think really any of those teams can come out on top. So I think you just err to the side of teams that have been there before, which is why I would give England the nod in that group anyways, just based on international success, if you want to call it that.
Well, won't have to wait too much longer to find out. But we've discussed our predictions for who we think are going to win, as well as some other potential top contenders. It's time to move on to the next segment of today's cast. Let's move on to the Dark Horse pick. So, Dark Horse, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not talking about people we think might win a tournament necessarily, or that certainly could qualify. It's more so teams we think are going to do quite well. Think Korea and Turkey in 2002, that type of thing, or Colombia 2014, I think it was. Teams that just punch up and like sort of overperform and do themselves really proud, but not necessarily winning or necessarily getting top four. So, Cora, who is your pick for Dark Horse at the 2022 World Cup?
So I'll answer because with two different ways. I think Dark Horse to win the whole thing. I'm gonna go with the Netherlands. I think that they've been kind of sneaky strong the past few years, but just haven't quite strung it all together. And I think Group A is a bit of a softball, um, since you have the host in there. Dark Horse to make an impact anyway. I'm gonna go with Canada. I think that they've been playing above their weight for well over a year now, and I don't think that stops anytime soon.
Way Team Canada all the way. I'm fully on board with that. Nixon, what's your feeling on the Dark Horse?
I have a good feeling about Korea, actually, as you mentioned. The way they play football is as well very separate from most of the Western world. They are way more technical with the game. They are way more specific with how they play their placements and stuff. Unlike how in a lot of the West, it's more player based and more wild, as of right now at least. So that could give them some sort of an edge with the current good players that are in amazing form as well. They have a very, very good chance to maybe not win, of course, but do way better than what most people would assume they would do.
Well, that segues quite nicely into my prediction because, once again, I'm predicting the same as Nixon, and I also think Korea is going to be the dark horse of this tournament. I was shaken a bit in my belief. I didn't actually realise this for some time, and this goes to show how much I'm paying attention, but their star player, correct me if I'm wrong on the pronunciation, Heung-min Son, the Tottenham Hotspur player, he has been injured all season long, but he is in the squad. Now, he's a bloody good player. He's really good. I imagine if he wasn't at Spurs, he'd have won a fair few trophies already. And he certainly goes into their tournament as their talisman. But if he can get fit and if he can play, I think Korea have a real good chance of making it in the quarters. I just think I agree. A lot of my points are the same as Nixon's. I think they're one of those teams that people severely underestimate, and that they just play a style of football that I think a lot of the top nations might struggle with. Their group is certainly one I could see them struggling to get out of, because Portugal definitely favourites to win that group. Uruguay, you can never really count them out either. They've had a fairly decent run of form. I think they can do it though. I think they can make it out. And I think they can get to those later stages if they can stay on form and just utilize their strengths best.
If you don't mind, could we go through? I have a couple other teams that I think that I would like to hear you guys' opinions about as potential little upset picks.
Yeah, sure.
So I want to hear you guys' thoughts on Costa Rica, because this is often a team, a squad, a country that can take a bite out of a big boy every once in a while. They're one of those sneaky teams that have a lot of speed many years. I think that they were the team that took the Netherlands to the wire when there was the double red card game, maybe 8 years ago. And I think that it might be a trap game for Spain and Germany, and also Japan's in there, which is kind of another one. But Costa Rica, I think, is going to be the one that does a bit more damage in that group.
I do agree that I think Costa Rica, while they have two very, very powerful nations against them, have a very good chance to do well, since, as you said, they are a very, very fast nation. They have incredible pace on their players. And a lot of bigger, more powerful nations, such as Germany, are more focused on the technical aspects of the game and way more on power, where Costa Rica could essentially, in a good situation, they could run laps around Germany, even possibly Spain, even though Spain does have a lot of fast players. A lot of Spanish players, at least from what I've seen on the squad list, are on the slower, more technical side. it seems like they are trying to take it more safely than most, or not most, but a lot of the other countries who are putting more young, virile, more pacey players, more risky picks that can cause situations like with Costa Rica, where they can just possibly pull out a victory against them for being able to just outpace them and out energy them.
Yeah, echoing sentiments, Costa Rica certainly have given themselves a pedigree of being well, not necessarily giant killers, but upsetters. So, Cora, you mentioned they've got two big heavyweights in their group. Circle back to 2014, they were placed in a group alongside England, Uruguay, and Italy. Guess who won that group? Costa Rica. Like, it was incredible. Like, everyone expected they were just going to get crushed by everyone, but they beat Uruguay, they beat Italy, they drew with England. They got through out of that group, and that's three at the time certainly extremely heavyweight nations, at least by Costa Rica's standards. I don't think they qualify for 2018, so I don't think there's any data to sort of compare them against there, but they have the precedent of being teams that can deliver huge upsets, and that is going to be one of the more interesting groups to keep an eye on, I think, because you've got two incredible European nations with a lot of pedigree between them, but that Costa Rica, I could easily see there being some upsets. I just hope Japan doesn't get trampled a bit too hard amongst all the others. What was your next suggestion, Cora, for a thing to look at?
Yeah, so the other one we touched on it slightly, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about Iran because they are at the very least top 25. This is a very close to home venue. They play in these conditions quite often. And I think that they might have a pretty strong home showing. I know that there's, a lot of political stuff going on in Iran right now with the hijab, and I don't want to get too far into that. So, but I do think that the closeness to home is going to play a pretty big factor, and then maybe showing up more than one would expect in a few of these games, and also people not really knowing how high up in the rankings they actually are.
Yeah, I actually hadn't even occurred to me the sort of like geopolitically they are certainly closer to Qatar than any other country, and culturally, I mean, I'm not going to pretend to understand the minutiae of Middle Eastern politics, but I imagine they are closer than perhaps any other nation, so they will certainly, in that sense and in sort of the climate, they will be right at home. They they are one of those nations that I feel like every time I hear about them, they're always underrated, and they generally are seen as quite good in their region at least. I don't think they won their group. I think they came second in their group for qualifying. But yeah, I don't know if I necessarily agree with you on them potentially being a dark horse. Because I think if anyone's going to come bottom of that group, I think it will be them. But I could very easily be proven wrong on that.
I think the case of them being a dark horse could come into play if they make it through with the group somehow, because they do have very strong opponents in the group other than them. And they, I think they kind of benefit from a similar type of situation as, say, Japan and Korea, where the opponents they have, USA, England, and Wales, all have a very standard type of football they play. And they might be able to surprise them with something that usually the more standardized, very, very English football players might not be able to predict.
Well, there is certainly a chance. Well, as always, we'll have to wait and see on that one. Yeah, so we'll wrap up that segment and move on to our next part. So I want to discuss everyone's hot takes on what they expect to see at this World Cup. So this can be anything. This is sort of like an open category. Anything you think might happen, any predictions you have, any ideas that you might have for something that might happen at the World Cup. It's completely up to you guys. So I would like to actually start this time round, since you guys have started the last two. So, my hot take, maybe not that hot. Sorry, bit of a hiccup. My hot take is that only one European team is going to get through to the Final Four. And to piggyback off of that, I think either an Asian or African team will join that Final Four. As I mentioned earlier in the cast, there is a precedent that when World Cups are hosted outside of Europe, there are less European nations in the knockout stages. I think the stage is set this time round for European dominance to sort of stop or waver at the very least. And I do think we're not going to see a blanket 4 European teams or 3 European teams in the semi-finals this time around. What do you guys think of that one?
I do agree that in the sense that I think Europe has a poor chance to go more forward in the after group stages. Mostly, I would say, because of the climate issues, and I think most of the European countries on the group stages have had somewhat poor runs lately in general, like player wise, even in the club teams, such as like say in England's, for example, Harry Maguire, who is playing, is doing absolutely horribly, etc. So a lot of the countries might not even get the chance to express how they play football properly because of those kind of issues, where some outliers such as the temperature, because that could easily take out like a country like England, who is very used to very mild weathers, or an attitude problem that has also been kind of an issue with England from what I've seen before, that could easily take them out of the competition very, very early on if they let that get a hang of them, which is why I think a lot of the other European countries as well might drop very early.
Sorry, Cora, I'll let you give your opinion in just a second, but I just did want to mention, we've talked a lot about like the climate, for example, but I think there's so many unique factors going into this specific World Cup that we have perhaps never anticipated before. Obviously, the big one it being this is the middle of the season. Squads are still being announced. To my knowledge, I think Canada only announced their squad a few hours ago. The tournament starts in a week, and players are still playing for their clubs. There are still matches being played out there. There's still potential for injuries, things like that. This is such a bizarre World Cup due to how it's placed in the year. And don't get me wrong, I get why it has to be that way, because the climate is a big issue, and if it was during summer, it would be impossible to play. But there's so much potential for things to go so bizarre and so weird just due to how strangely placed it is. There could be injuries. Teams aren't getting any warm-up matches. They're literally just getting together in camp, training a bit, then going straight into match one. It's there's a lot of potential for that sort of thing beyond just the climate, I think.
I really enjoy that you said that, because I was going to bring up, guess what major international league just finished last week? The MLS. They're all in their off season right now. I do know there's quite a few international American players, but a grand majority of them played domestic, and they just wrapped up. So I do think that will certainly play a role. We don't know how much club politics are going to get involved, if there are players that clubs don't want to risk losing, or players on injury reserve, or stuff like that. Shenanigans that will come down the road. But yeah, I think that honestly, we probably are all in agreement that FIFA probably should have revoked Qatar's hosting after all that corruption stuff came out, and this is actually going to be a complete shit show. But hopefully it'll be entertaining.
I do agree with I did want to add that I think the US is at an incredible advantage, especially in Group B, with the fact that their season has ended, so they have a lot more time to get together and train as a full team and get that chemistry kind of flowing. And while they are kind of grouped up in the same group with Wales and England, where they might be stuck in a climate that they're not used to, the US is still very, very widely known to have very, very hot areas in it. So, if you take that into consideration, I think out of the very, very hot countries like Brazil or Argentina or Iran or Qatar, I think the US might have the best chance to fight the climate, other than, say, possibly like Spain or Portugal.
Yeah, and I was gonna mention this in a little bit later, but I'll just bring it up now. But in the CONCACAF, only Canada is really the only cold climate game that the U.S. plays because everything else is in the Caribbean, Mexico, Central America. And I was gonna bring that up, but now that it's here in the opening, I'll just make that my point now.
You saying that though is quite funny. I think I mentioned this to you a few months back when the USA played Honduras in Michigan, I think it was, and like the temperature was like unbelievably cold. And obviously Honduras is a very warm nation. It's right in the middle of the equator. It's in the Caribbean. Their players were suffering like crazy. So I think there is precedent they do play some cold matches every now and then because America is like USA is it's really cold up north. It's warm down south. I think it. I don't know what they do in terms of like playing at home. Like whether they don't have like a Wembley Stadium like England does. Do they dance all over the place? Do they play sometimes in New York, sometimes in Texas? I don't know how it works, but I kind of feel like they might have a lot of experience in like varied climates.
They hop around. I believe they play Mexico and Denver quite often, and in Houston, in places where their fans can get to easily. They also put, obviously, they technically put some games in colder climates to get the free 3 points. Um, every team, the CONCACAF's kind of a mess like that. But yeah, they do have a range, and also all those teams that play in the MLS, there's teams from Pacific Northwest, from New York City, from Austin. So, and they all play each other. So there is quite a temperature climate range that they get exposure to.
Just quick correction, it was Minnesota, not Michigan. I just remembered that's what it was. All right, let's move on to the next hot take. Nixon, what's your hot take for this World Cup?
Actually, just before, I want to add the last point to that conversation that I wanted to correct they don't have the kind of quote-unquote Wembley Stadium. They do have a stadium that is used very widely for football. I believe it's called the Rose Bowl Stadium, which is by capacity even larger than what Wembley Stadium is. And that is their kind of Wembley Stadium. Of course, it's not nearly as large as Wembley Stadium is by like how many people know of it and how many people actually want to gather there for matches. But by definition, they have like the quote unquote main stadium. It is around Pasadena. I'm not sure how warm or whatever.
That's Southern
it is
California.
So it should
LA.
be like relatively warm as well then, shouldn't it? Like, if I recall correctly, California is one of the hotter or warmer states of the US outside of like very, very deserted zones.
Yeah, but it's also coastal. So I guess it depends how inland it is. Yeah, so that's in Southern California. It's near the LA area. And it gets, it's in the 80s most of the time, I would say. Which is like, I think, high 20 Celsius for all of you internationals.
Yeah.
Thank
you. I was just agreeing that, yeah.
Nixon, I asked you for your hot take.
Oh, yeah, my hot take. Well, we touched on it a tiny bit before, and it's about the corruption of the entire Qatar World Cup. And there have been a lot of very, very, very new updates to the situation, such as what I've been seeing a lot of videos and posts of, is that FIFA is paying off, or at least allegedly paying off, normal Qatar citizens to act as fans of specific countries and make it seem like the entire competition is more celebrated than it actually is.
I saw that.
That doesn't surprise me. I don't know if you guys remember in 2010 when North Korea were in the tournament and they literally paid like Chinese people to show up and be North Korean fans. That has that energy. It definitely reminds me of that.
I do. I think it is a very similar situation as that as well, because a lot of the videos I've seen, think I have spotted the same people wearing Argentinian, Brazilian, and Portuguese shirts, and instead of like fanning a specific member, the shirts on the back of them say "Brazil fan Qatar" and nothing else.
Wait, really?
Yeah,
that's
it's something along those lines.
actually quite funny.
Mhm.
They just didn't do the bare minimum of research to pick a team or like a player from the team, so they just put Brazil fan. That's quite funny.
Effort's been minimal.
So what is? I'm a little bit confused. What actually is your hot take in that? I mean, I don't think saying that this is a corrupt World Cup is a particularly hot take personally. Was there something else there that I'm missing?
That specific topic of them buying out fans for the other countries, or in general buying out fans, that is kind of a controversial topic as of right now, because it's not been confirmed anywhere. So it could be taken as a hot topic or hot take that they are doing this indeed.
Oh, so you think it will like come out during the tournament or after the tournament that is actually genuinely happening?
I think either at the very beginning of the tournament or right before it, there's going to be some big lead to either that it has happened or that it has not happened. Because there are a lot of good leads for both sides. Say the Brazil fans or Portuguese fan Qatar shirts. But as far as I know, Qatar also, before this year, hasn't had much of a chance to go into the World Cup. So they have a lot of fans who are fans of international teams because football is still big in Qatar. So they would realistically fan a bigger country like Argentina or Brazil or France, for example.
Yeah, I do think it's their first time ever qualifying, and this is obviously by default because the host nation. So there is, I would certainly say there is definitely going to be a lot of support for other nations because, I mean, if your nation is never very good, like you support them at heart, but generally speaking, you would probably not really like. You'd probably find another team to support as well. Yeah, cool. Cora, that just leaves you for your hot take. So, what have you got for us?
I'm calling that Germany doesn't make it out of groups. For some of the reasons that we discussed. I think Spain is the better of the two European teams. I think that the team that Costa Rica is going to take the big old 3-point bite out of is Germany between the two of them. And I think that they fiddle into a tie with Japan after giving up a silly goal. Especially because I think Japan is their first game of the group. And I think that kind of like they get off to a sluggish start. They have a tough game against Spain, and then Costa Rica kind of puts the nail in the coffin. That's my play-by-play.
That would be a monumentally bad thing for them to happen because obviously 2018, we said it earlier, they bombed out of the group stage. They had a very poor Euros, a very tepid performance against England in the last 16. They have not, considering they only won the World Cup 8 years ago, they've had a horrendous run of form over the last 8 years, and if they did go out of the group stage again, oh, that would be bad. That would be really fucking bad. But I could see it happening. I could definitely see it happening. I don't think there's any world where they come bottom of the group, but third, definitely doable. Any input on that one, Nixon?
Generally speaking, not much. I think they very much do have a chance to have that happen to them. But I do think that they are going to pull through since they are one of the overall strongest football nations that it has been for the last very long time. They have always placed for around the last 20 years or so, or maybe even longer, maybe 30 years. they have always been at least sort of close to the title race. Like in the 90s, they won it. Then they had a few break years, but then they came third twice. Then they won it again. So I think they have a chance. They have a chance at it, but again, they do have a good chance to completely flop and be one of the worst teams in the entire competition.
Yeah. So then a follow-up, just a quick question, since it's related. Since I'm saying that Germany's gonna fail, and it's part of like a grander call by the three of us that Europe's going to struggle outside of maybe a team. And I've already kind of thrown my hat in the Spanish ring. Perry, you said one European team in the Final Four. What's that team? Who is that team going to be?
Oh, you put me on the spot here. Let's see. I think. Ooh, this is tough. I'm gonna be optimistic and say England. I want to say England's gonna be that team.
I'm gonna have to disagree with that, and I think that out of the situation that everyone is being put in, I think Portugal might have the second best chance after Spain.
All right, cool. Well, those are some nice, spicy hot takes. Only time will tell if they age like wine or like milk. I think we'll have to do a follow-up podcast after the World Cup is finished to sort of go back over all this and see how we did in terms of our predictions. But before we move on to our final segment, which is, of course, who we want to win, I'd like to do a bit of a quick fire round. What I'm going to do is I'm going to name a country, and then I want you both to tell me just how far you think they're going to make it. So you say group stage, round of 16, final, winner, whatever. And I'm just going to go through like 6 or 8 countries and just see what your guys' predictions are. All right, let's start off with Uruguay.
I'm gonna go out on a limb, and I'm gonna say they're gonna go out in the group stage.
Ooh, okay, Cora.
I say round of 16.
Okay. I'm gonna say round of 16 as well, to be honest. Yeah. Serbia.
Group.
I also say group.
I've got a little bit more faith in them. I am going to say round of 16. Canada.
Quarters.
Yeah, just was gonna say quarters as well.
Final. No, I'm joking. I want Canada to succeed so much, but I think they're going out in the groups, unfortunately. Let's see. Senegal.
Can I add something to the last one?
Yeah, go for it.
I think Canada might have a chance in the next World Cup, way better than in this one.
You think they're building a bit of a dynasty now or something, and this is just a stepping stone?
It's also North America.
Yeah.
Yes, that is true, isn't it? Yeah, and they're going to have home games. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they have the privilege then that say the US have this year of like having a long time to actually build their team. I think Canada is kind of behind US on that front, but next time in the next after the next 4 years, I think they're going to be at least at par with the US, if nothing else.
I could definitely see that, to be honest. Yeah. All right, 2 more. I kind of want to go over groups we haven't really touched. So Senegal, my next pick. African champions, obviously.
I want to say round of 16.
I was going to at first say group, but I do think they have a chance to go to round of 16, or maybe even a tad bit further, because I've watched some of their games and they actually play really well currently. They're in great form.
Whenever I see them play, they always any African game I see always seems to be like 1-0 penalty shootout. And they have won something like 3 or 4 penalty shootouts recently, all against Egypt, I think. So they have the edge where it matters, but I really think they're going to struggle against other opposition. I'm going to say groups for them. I think Ecuador and Netherlands get out of that group, personally. All right, final team. I would like to hear your thoughts on Mexico.
Group.
Oh, this one's tricky. Because I think that. I think they actually get it over Poland. I think that they make it to. Let's go with round of 8. Let's go with quarters.
Ooh, that's spicy. I'm actually going to join you on the quarters prediction. I think something. This is nothing more than a hunch. Something's telling me something about Mexico is going to just burn bright this time round, and they're going to do better than people expect. That's a tough group to get out of because I think Argentina are definitely the favourites. Poland probably are the firm second favourites, but they haven't been great in recent years either. Saudi Arabia, I genuinely couldn't say anything about Saudi Arabia, but yeah, I'm going to have to join you on the quarters there.
I do want to add to the Poland comment that in recent years, while they have struggled, very, very recently, they do have one of the better strikers in the entire world currently in Robert Lewandowski, who might be able to get the edge.
I feel like I haven't heard him since he's moved there.
From what I do know, he's in relatively good form, but I'm not sure if he plays all that much due to the World Cup coming up. He wants to save himself. The same way, for example, Messi is kind of saving himself, and I think he's skipping the last game before the World Cup just so he doesn't get injured or there isn't any complications.
You know what? We'll have to. This is certainly the moment for a player like him to bring his magic, and he is getting a bit older now, so it's got to be now. All right. Well, thank you for joining me on that little quick fire round. Sorry, was there something more you want to say, Alex, before we move on?
Just about Robert Lewandowski. He is currently doing 14 matches and 13 goals with 4 assists in La Liga this year.
Oh, that is a lot better than I just feel like I'd read somewhere that he wasn't doing particularly well, and I know Barcelona didn't get out of the Champions League group stage either, so I don't know. I just assumed it was a bit, it wasn't doing all that great, but that's some good stats. In fairness,
I do believe one of the only players who is outdoing him currently is Haaland.
That's a bold claim because Haaland's doing very well. All right, cool. So let's move on to the final segment of today's episode, and I think this is going to be a bit of a quicker one. And I'm only really interested in hearing one person's opinion because I think the other person's opinion is going to be very obvious. Who do we want to win the World Cup? So we've gone through who we think's going to win. We've gone through some hot takes and some dark horses, but who do you, heart of hearts, want to win? No matter how viable it is, no matter how, how likely it is, in an ideal world, who would win for you? I'll start it off real quickly because I'm obvious. England, obviously I'm an England fan. I have been for a long time. Well, my entire life, and I would like them to win. But that's a bit of a boring answer. So I'm going to say, if not England, I want Canada to win. I am Team Canada all the way. I will be with them there every step of the way. I'm very much looking forward to seeing their journey at this World Cup. And there's no chance in hell of it ever happening in a million years, but I want them to do it. Could you imagine the reaction there would be if a team like Canada just came out of nowhere and won the World Cup? Absolutely insane. The first North American nation to do it before the USA. That'd be amazing. But yeah, those are mine, obviously. Let's move on to Cora, because I feel like yours are going to be quite obvious as well.
Yeah, I obviously I would love to see the USA win because I think it would be it'd be funny. But any North American team, I would just love to see do really well coming up to our host final or our host World Cup.
Yeah, yeah, that's when you say North America, you also including Costa Rica in that because they are.
I am also any CONCACAF team.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so Nixon, you're the one I want to hear from because obviously there's no Finland at the World Cup, so you have free reign at these 32 teams to pick a team independently that you would like to see win. Who do you want to see win?
I actually have 2 favorites that I'm very, very much torn on. One of them is Brazil, because ever since the last World Cup, not the last World Cup, but the World Cup before that, where they tragically lost to Germany, I feel like they deserve to do better due to the very much star striker Neymar getting very, very badly injured before the Germany game, which could have led them to actually win if he was very much in form. And
Ooh.
this being Neymar's, also this is as well Neymar's last World Cup. He stated that this will be his final World Cup. So I feel like he deserves to go out with a bang, since he was robbed of the ability to even play in the last games in the World Cup that him and his team wish to win the absolute most out of any World Cup they've won or had the chance to win.
Wait, I've got a couple of questions there, but you're referring to the 7-1 loss, right?
Yes.
You think they might have won if Neymar was fully fit?
I feel like the injury that Neymar got was such a big letdown for the team that the entire morale fell completely, and they did not have the star player. And with the morale going, no one was sure if Neymar would even play football again, because the injury, if I remember correctly, it was if it was 1 or 2 inches to the right, Neymar couldn't have had walked ever again to that. So the entire team was unsure and scared of the entire future of one of their best players of all time.
Ooh, that's all fair, but I don't know, man. That they were so outplayed in that match. I don't see how one man could have made a difference. Like, even if he had scored like a hat trick on his own, it wouldn't have been nowhere near enough. So I think that's a hot take. That's a spicy take. But I actually didn't know that he had said this was going to be his final World Cup, because in my mind he's like what, 28, something like that. He's not that old, so that's interesting that he's made that claim.
He's 30.
He's third. Oh, okay, that's a bit older than I was expecting. But even so, you'd expect at least one more out of him. That's interesting. Maybe he's trying to preserve himself for his club. Like I know a few players have done that, like James Milner, Jamie Vardy come to mind, retired from international duty before their time. But yeah, I actually didn't know that. So yeah, that's actually made their whole presence and their whole World Cup a lot more interesting.
And I do agree in the fact that I don't think Neymar could have fully maybe defeated Germany on his own, but I do think there was a chance that was the reason why they had such a humiliating loss. And for saying for the Neymar stating he's gonna possibly quit international football, I believe that is because of all the consistent hate he's been getting throughout the years, and like very, 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 very blatant, even racism towards him. And I believe the post was something like, he does not enjoy playing football on that level anymore at all, so he does not want to be a part of it. So this will be the last time. I'm not sure if that is fully credible or if that is what's going to actually happen after the next 4 years. But that is what I've seen from screenshots from Neymar's own Instagram story and I believe Twitter as well.
That definitely adds an interesting. I think this is going to be such an interesting World Cup in so many ways. It could end up, and might very well end up, being a complete and utter shit show, just due to so many different factors. But it feels like there's like a bit of a touch of destiny about this World Cup to me. Like, you've got 3 amazing players, 2 of the greatest of all time at the very least, doing potentially their last World Cup. Like, you know, you've got nations qualifying who've never qualified. You've got nations like Wales and Canada who haven't qualified for decades showing up. You've got a fairly weakened European contingent. There's so much going into this World Cup. I think whether it ends up being a complete shit show for football reasons or non-football reasons, or whether it ends up being just something fairly routine, I think we're going to have a very, very interesting next few weeks at this World Cup. And I think there's always some level of, not necessarily controversy, but some stuff that gets remembered by the World Cup. You know, in South Africa, you had the whole Vuvuzela shit and things like that. There's always something that stands out with every World Cup. And I think this is going to be a very, very, very memorable World Cup. Whether that's for the right reasons or not, that remains to be seen. But I think we are going to have a very exciting few weeks ahead of us. All right, so that concludes our prepared remarks. Does anyone have any final things they want to say, any final predictions or anything they want to get off their chest before we conclude tonight?
I still want to add a little tiny bit to that last point, where I believe Neymar might very much well be a contender for being as consistent This is also a very big hot take, but I think Neymar has had the capacity for a while to be on the same level as, say, Ronaldo. And I think Neymar is has been the third best player in the world for a while. And the only reason he hasn't been put on the same pedestal as Ronaldo is because he's not been playing for as long as Ronaldo and has not been as consistent for as long as Ronaldo.
I just hope everyone has fun.
The diplomatic answer. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for tuning into this episode and listening to our World Cup hot takes. As I said, I think after the World Cup is concluded, we will do another episode where the three of us get together. We'll revisit our predictions and we'll see how right or wrong we got them all. I think that's going to be a fairly interesting one to follow up on. We'll also use that episode to sort of do like a bit of a wrap up on the whole thing in general and sort of review everything that happened and like obviously talk about who won, etc, etc. But that will be late December, early January, depending on whenever we get round to it. Until then, I suggest you all tune in, have fun, enjoy, and laugh at us if we get it all completely wrong. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, this has been TPOG, the podcast of gaming, presented by TPOG. I've been Para. This has been Nixon.
Thank you.
And Cora.
Bye-bye.
And we will see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.